Good evening, everyone. Now that the fans are off, we can talk. Welcome to the Institute of Design. For those of you who are not familiar with the Institute, we are an 85-year-old graduate-only school of design. We were founded in 1937 as the new Bauhaus. And the Bauhaus, as many of you know, is one of the most influential schools of design that was born in Germany and basically invented modernism. Over our 85 years, we have pioneered systems thinking in design and human-centered design, which many people know as design thinking. My name is Inijo Matthew, and I'm the Dean of the Institute of Design. And today I'm excited to welcome you to the 5th iteration of the Lucas Daniels Lecture Series in Sustainable Systems. Some of you may know Lucas. Lucas was an alum of ID. He was very interested in sustainable systems. Unfortunately, we lost Lucas a few years ago, and his family set up this series as a gift to future generations of ID community who are interested in sustainable systems. So I want to thank Marty Daniel and all of the Lucas Daniel family for this incredible gift that they've given to us in the form of knowledge dissemination and creation, which is the mission of ID, right? I'm sure you've all noticed that the AC isn't working. Chicago decided it is summer and forgot to send a memo to our building. It's a good joke. I used it 3 times in the last 2 days. While I apologize for the inconvenience, it is also a great reminder of why we need to talk about sustainable systems. This building is beautiful, but it is a first world solution. If the electricity ever fails, we're all done for. We have to go home to another air-conditioned space. This is the question that we have to ask. This is the complexity that we have to deal with. At ID, we take pride in the fact that there are many ways to ask this question. And today we have 2 eminent guests to look at the complex system of food from 2 different perspectives. Maura, Shea is going to introduce both of them, but I just want to give you a sense of why we put this series together in this form. LinYee Yuan works at the Emerson Collective and is the founder-editor of Mold magazine. Matt Lederhausen is a former executive at McDonald's, board chair at ROTI, and an investor. So LinYee approaches the problem of complex food systems from the perspective of dominant discourse, while Matt approaches it from investing capital. Both are interesting approaches to solving the problem of food complexity. How do we learn from these approaches? What can we do to take the ideas from these approaches and build it into our own systems? That's what we're going to talk about today. So, our own professor, Maura Shea, co-director of the Food Systems Action Lab, is going to engage both LinYee and Matt in a conversation. So without further ado, let's welcome Maura Shea to the stage. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. We are so happy you're here tonight. Thank you very much for making the trip and tuning in online, for those of you online. As Inijo said, I'm Maura Shea. I'm an associate professor here at the Institute of Design, and with my friend and colleague, Dr. Professor Wesleyan Ashton, we lead the ID Action Lab for Food Systems. And we are thrilled to have these guests tonight here to celebrate and remember and to share their perspectives on food systems. I am personally honored to be hosting this event named for my friend and colleague Lucas Daniel and to honor his family, and we are thrilled to have this chance to be together. A quick comment about the Food Systems Action Lab. We collaborate, Wesleyan and I and our many students, very closely with community members, with government officials, and with funders to really explore how we can shift the food systems toward much more equitable and sustainable structures and practices. We do that using systems design methods and tools. We use human-centered design approaches, and together collaborate in a collective fashion how these systems need to be shifting. And so what's very exciting tonight is being able to showcase both these two guests and how the Food Systems Action Lab is really activating this awareness about system shifting. We're focused in food systems around waste prevention, so food waste prevention, and also how public procurement is done for institutional food. Those are both systems that actually are major drivers of inequities and of emissions. And so in both cases, we believe that this kind of collaborative design approach can yield significant impacts that shift those systems in meaningful ways. As Anijo said, LinYee is raised in Houston, Texas, a nurturer of local food ecologies and the founder of Field Meridians, which is a nonprofit organization that is focused on strengthening local food ecologies through critical site-specific interventions in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. She's a design journalist and founder and editor of Mold magazine, as we said, which provides a very distinct vision for how design can transform our food futures. It's really a privilege to have you here tonight. In 2022, yes, welcome. In 2022, LinYee was included in the Future Laboratories Future 100 Innovators, which here at ID, we pay attention to those awards and are thrilled to have you here. She's also an editorial director at the Emerson Collective, which uses philanthropy and venture capital to support really great leaps in innovation toward a more equal and just America. Mats Lederhausen, welcome. We're thrilled you're here. Please applaud Mats. Welcome, Mats. Mats is an innovator and entrepreneur in the restaurant industry, and he's built his career at McDonald's both in Sweden and globally. He's an investor and a director of ROTI Mediterranean Restaurant and many other ventures that are dedicated to impactful capitalism. He's currently the founder and CEO of Cause, an investment firm that supports transformative businesses who are committed to a purpose bigger than their product. And he writes a terrific weekly newsletter called In Pursuit of Elevation, and I encourage you to check it out. So welcome to you both. We're thrilled to have this chance to learn from you and to hear your views on the many factors that systems designers grapple with. Each of them will have a few minutes to provide some introductory remarks, and then I'm going to moderate a short conversation about the role of design and innovation in our food systems and what some of the key considerations are for the social and environmental sustainability. We will then have time at the end for questions and answers, so please prepare your thoughts, and then we hope you will join us for a reception following, which will be here in this room. All right, I will invite LinYee first to the mic.
Hi, Chicago. Thanks so much for having me here today. Before I start, we're talking about food today, so I really wanted to first acknowledge that we are on unceded ancestral lands of the Council of Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi people. I wanted to thank Anijo, John, Kristen, and Maura for their generous invitation for me to be here with you and in conversation with you today, and the Lucas Daniels family for generously creating this opportunity for all of us to be together and in conversation. So thank you. For the past 10 years, my research and practice has really been grounded in asking designers, what is the future of food? And the place that we're thinking about right now, and this is always a perspective that is in emotion, is that designers should be engaging people with the idea that we are not mere consumers within the food systems. We should be creative collaborators within the food system. And we should be doing so with the purpose of laying the foundation for food sovereignty, which is the right for every single person to have access to nutritious, delicious, culturally appropriate food that is produced in an ecologically responsible and sustainable way. It was in 2011 when I was the editor of an incredible online design resource called Course MD7 when I came across this magnificent project. It's a kitchen, and it's a concept by Philips. The idea is that you would do your food prep and on this kind of wooden pedestal, and then you would take your organic waste and put it into the sink. And this beautiful copper sill, which you might recognize as a kind of familiar framework for fermentation, would then compost this organic waste, and the off gases would be collected that would then power the lighting system in your kitchen and potentially the stove. And I was just in awe of this project. It just stunned me. It's poetic, it's beautiful, it's closed loop. And the most incredible thing is that their vision of the future of the kitchen was a biological machine. It was something that we were constantly collaborating with. And at the time, design publications like the one that I was working for and other ones that were quite popular at the time were not covering projects like this online or in print. They were looking at design as merely furniture and lighting. And this gap really inspired me to think about, well, I'm deeply interested in this work. There are student projects that were cropping up around the world that were also looking at food and design. And so I decided in 2013 to start Mold, which was really supposed to be like a nights and weekends project for me. I asked my friend to help me skin a Tumblr page, and they were like, we could probably help you design a better framework for this. So in 2013, with just me at the back of the keyboard, I launched Mold online very quietly, and the first person to show me any sort of response to it was Paola Antonelli, who was the curator of design at MoMA at the time. And I was just like, wow, people are actually really interested in the potential of design in the space of food. And since then, we've published over 1,000 stories, articles online. We've grown our Instagram following to over almost 70,000 people. Please follow us. We're at This Is Mold. And we've engaged in a decade's worth of discourse around the potential of design in the food space. It was in 2016, though, when my friends were still asking me what I was doing on my nights and weekends. They didn't understand what food design was. They were like, is it plating? Are you working with chefs? Are you designing growing systems? I was like, yes, and I realized that in order for me to speak to my preferred audience of designers, the best thing for me to do would be to create a beautifully designed object. And I'm an editor. I'm a magazine head. I've worked in magazines my entire career. So the only beautifully designed object I know how to create is a magazine. And so in 2016, we kickstarted a magazine, and it was always going to be 6 issues. And each issue explored a different facet of potential for where design could actually make an impact in the space of food. The first issue was about designing for the microbiome. So we talked about basically fermentation. We talked about synthetic biology. This was 2016. That was very radical at the time. We talked about human waste. We talked about poop. We talked about the future of toilets. But what it was really about was about the ways that food is an entry place to understand that we are in constant collaboration with the unseen. The second issue was about designing for the table. We collaborated with Sight Unseen, which are other design editors, and we talked about the way designing tableware and furniture can shape different dining rituals. I don't know if any of you have actually dined in different cultures or cultural settings where you're eating with your hands or on the floor or using different utensils. All of these things shape the way our bodies are in relationship with food. The third issue, which Institute of Design has generously provided here and that Maura was an incredible collaborator with, was about food waste. Anybody who has interacted with the Food System Action Lab understands that food waste is one of the most critical cultural questions of our time. And we were really thinking about how could food waste be a resource to power the future. And the fourth issue was about sensing. One of my favorite little nuggets of information that I've learned in the past 10 years is that we are designed to love to eat. Eating is the only thing we do as humans besides having sex that engages all of our senses. And so this issue was really about how can we think about the idea of sensing as a way of forging new paths in our relationship with food, whether that's human-computer sensing, just the ways that we are thinking about food as a material. And then the last issue that has come out was about seeds. And it wasn't just about the seeds that we plant in the ground, but it was also about the seeds of ideas that we carry through times of crises. We started this work ahead of the pandemic, and then we just kind of continued thinking about it through the pandemic. And we came out the other end understanding that seeds can really be a teacher. They can teach us about networks of care. They can teach us about mutual solidarity. And over the last 10 years, this work has really showed me that it's not really about what we're going to be eating in the future, but it's about how we're going to be eating. And this question of how is very unique to the world of design because design, as we all know, teaches us to be interdisciplinary. It teaches us to create frameworks for interdisciplinary conversation. Design teaches us how to bring ancient knowledge and new knowledge into daily practice. It teaches us about relationships and that food, specifically our relationship with food, should always be grounded in joy, memory, and emotion. Design has taught us in the past that it should be about form and function, but I argue that the third tenet of design should always be care. The seed steward, Rowan White, taught us that the original covenant, agriculture was the original covenant. It was an agreement between people and the land. We take care of the land, and in return, the land takes care of us. And so now we've come full circle into our sixth and final print issue, and we are talking about soil. We are talking about the living and sacred material of soil. The recent, now I'm blanking on his name, the agronomist that recently won the Nobel Prize of Agronomy, talks about soil as a spiritual material. It is the only thing that can turn death into life. And so as we consider the complexity, which I thank you, Anijo, for bringing up this idea of our food systems, I wanted to kind of end with this wonderful quote from the activist and lawyer Dean Spade. He writes that by participating in groups in new ways together, we are both building the world we want and becoming the kind of people that could live in such a world together. And I think about this as we embark on the next phase of mold. Mold will always be a design resource, but we have launched Field Meridians, which is about thinking about the ideas that we have been writing about for the past decade and piloting them in my neighborhood, specifically in Brooklyn and New York. We are doing place-based interventions that are with the hopes of strengthening food ecologies. Last summer, we launched by creating a mobile community kitchen in our neighborhood park. And we used it as a provocation to ask my neighbors, what should the future of food look like in Crown Heights? And we created opportunities for knowledge sharing, free workshops that anybody could participate in. We identified hardwood trees for mushroom building. We piqued curiosity, and we really, in those moments, I believe we cultivated a sense of belonging. And so as we start this conversation tonight, I wanted to leave you with 3 questions that I continually ask myself, because as I mentioned at the front of this little introduction, we're just in a kind of place of thinking right now. We're always going to be, our ideas will always be in motion. We're not on a linear path. But the questions I think about is how can we create a practice that is centered around connection? How can we build capacity for the human condition? How can we use the idea of emergence, which is the sum is greater than its parts, to imagine new futures? And finally, where are the nodal points where we can affect the most change? Field Meridians is inspired by the land. It is inspired by the ideas of acupuncture. And so the kind of leading light as we embark on this new work in Field Meridians is this idea of design acupuncture for liberation. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Wow. And now over for something completely different. That was great, LinYee. Thank you to the Institute, of course, to the Daniel family, Dean, Anijo, Maura, Kristen, and the gang for inviting me and for having us here. It's really good to be here. I'm a big fan of the school. I was an honored commencement speaker at 2015, I think, graduation. I've spent a lot of time here. I even taught a class here once with Larry Keeley for a few years. So I love the world that this school represents. You play a critical role in educating the kind of transition managers that the world so desperately needs. People that are equipped with both the aptitude and the attitude to identify the potential purpose hidden in the chaos of this moment. And God, it's chaotic, isn't it? I am going to take full advantage of my First Amendment rights and interpret the invitation slightly differently and discuss eating on Earth from a very different angle than what I think feeding and hunger and these kinds of words typically triggers. I will try to accomplish two things in these few minutes. First, I will try to make a case for why eating is our most important pressing problem and an opportunity that in turn can help solve almost everything. I know that's a tall order, but stay with me. My goal is simply to inspire more designers to turn their attention to our systemic eating disorders, which requires so much attention if we are to build the kind of society we want. I simply can't see a more urgent place where human-centered design is needed. Second, while not a designer, I will offer some ideas for what type of systems design we might need in order to solve these problems, just as thought starters. So in order to accomplish the first giant task, I will cover three very quick dimensions. First, a contextual point on the massive challenges we're all facing. Second, why economics matter so much. Boring, but real. Third, how this all ties into eating. So first, let's just state the obvious and acknowledge that our Western democracies in general, and I think our American democracy in particular, currently stuck in a polarized, divisive, dehumanizing mode that makes it almost impossible for anything good to happen. On top of this, Russia and China seem determined to play key roles in adding fuel to our fires. Add then a lot of challenges and critical concerns that we all care about, whether they're inequality, racism, insufficient active relative to climate. And it's hard these days to be truly optimistic about the future. There are, of course, different reasons why we find ourselves right here. There are evolutionary reasons. There are certainly technology reasons. And of course, there are political reasons. But I generally believe most things comes down to the Benjamins, to economic realities. Too many people in the world feel that they are not benefiting from the enormous progress that the world has seen in the last 50 years. That progress, by the way, is undeniable across almost any dimension. But it is clearly not evenly distributed. And many people are vying for a different kind of future where they are more included, understandably so. So let's now look at our economic reality. I believe, some agree, not all, that we have limited resources. We can only afford to spend money on some priorities, not all. I believe also, and many people, in fact most, agree, that there are many things we'd like to spend more money on. The wish list is very long. Some want a stronger defense. Some want free childcare. I'm one of them. Some want better education. Some want to forgive student debt. Many want more stable and sustainable climate. Almost all want safer communities, better roads, airports, and transit systems. And everyone wants better and affordable healthcare. But perhaps you have noticed that despite our inability to deliver against any of these desires, we are running the largest budget deficit in the history of our country. So repayment of debt and interest, increasing interest payments, takes precedent of almost anything else. And no, there is no free lunch. We can't just print more money. We just tried that with drastic and tragical consequences. And while paying more taxes is certainly one option, it will never be enough to solve these problems. And that brings me to eating. Are you ready for some really terrible news? Our healthcare system is completely out of control. We spend twice as much as any other nation on the planet with worse outcomes. 95%, let me repeat that, 95% of the spending on healthcare, which is almost 20% of our GDP, goes to treating chronic diseases. Almost all of those diseases are the results of poor lifestyle choices. And our healthcare system remains uninterested, or perhaps rather unincentivized, to care about our lifestyles. So we're making very little progress, and as late, actually making things worse. 76% of Americans are obese or overweight. 9 out of 10 Americans have metabolic disease, which is mainly a fancy word for eating disorders of various kinds. Yes, this number would be reduced and improved if we exercised more, for sure. And there are other contributing factors, for sure, as mental health issues and stress. So I'm much in favor of addressing those as well. But let's not kid ourselves. It's mainly a problem of intake. We eat too much, period. And way too much processed foods. Too many refined and simple carbohydrates. The latter we can just call out for the name they actually have, sugars. And we also consume way too much of our poor nutrition in the form of beverages. And not enough of the right kinds of fats, and way too much of the wrong kinds. And might I add, too much snacking too. So when we talk about feeding the world or feeding 10 billion, I'd like to focus on what we're supposed to eat, and then design a food production system that produces better health outcomes. If we could reduce our healthcare spending by 10% of GDP, which we can, the country I come from spend 8, we spend 19, America could suddenly have room to invest in all the underlying systems we all would like to see. 10% of GDP, for those that don't study economics carefully, is about 3 times what we spend on our entire defense system. So 10% would pay for, as an example, full free education for every American completely, and have 4% over to invest in whatever we would like. I am actually naive enough to believe that our politics would improve, our civil discourse would become more productive again, simply because our degrees of freedom would be enhanced. Without changing eating and later reducing healthcare costs, I don't think we will find the room to address many important priorities, and I'm really worried about that future. Lastly, having spent a career trying in and around food systems to change them, I will be the first to acknowledge that this is a wicked problem. It is not easy at all. But at least it starts with the recognition that this is, in my humble opinion, the single most important and urgent problem we face in America, and we don't behave as it is. There won't be one solution, of course. There never is a simple solution to complex problems. But together, particularly with smart designers in the room, we can envision a way to eat better, such that our healthcare economy becomes one of our smallest industries, and not like it is today, by far our largest one. Maura particularly asked me to cover some food systems design challenges. I'm obviously not a designer, but I'll give you 3 dimensions to consider. 1, regenerative farming. Helping U.S. farmers transitions profitably towards regenerative farming would help health, cost, and climate. From what I understand and have seen, many farms have done so successfully. And I'd love to see a systems take on how feasible it is to see this transition blow up in the years to come. How would it affect overall food production, food prices, foodborne diseases, and all the usual suspects that are thrown as barriers for this transition to happen? How do we enable this to happen at scale? Incentive structures. There are currently a myriad of incentives across our food landscapes, from food stamps to subsidies to grow corn from 1947, which would be a really good idea to stop that immediately. A systems perspective on all these subsidies and how they have shifted food consumption to cheap and empty calories that has caused an explosion in obesity and healthcare costs that is way more costly for society than the benefits of what those subsidies were originally intended to accomplish. And lastly, my favorite, behavior modification. As with most change, it actually starts with us. How do we also design a better user interface for everyday life that can help people make better choices? Be it in the form of insurance companies incentivizing better behaviors, hospitals carrying more holistic outcomes, or simply human beings using healthcare savings accounts to invest in their own more healthful journey. I would love to see our best designers attack behavior modification at large. We know that this all comes down to choices we all make. Yes, politics, taxation, and regulation can help, but ultimately we all know that eating broccoli is better than eating sugar. We all know that 1,000 calories of Coca-Cola can't be as good as 1,000 calories of carrots, yet we are primarily stuck in a calorie mindset as it relates to intake. I'm personally less excited about all the tech solutions that are commonly discussed, such as wearables, etc. They can be helpful for sure, to a point. But I would like to point to the fact that the only behavioral changes that seem to work is group support systems, social contagion. How do we design our neighborhoods, our workplaces, and our families in a way that we can help, enable, and reinforce a collective journey towards better health? That is the design challenge of our time. Thank you.
Mats has provided a visual that we didn't show. So, Mats, do you want to make any comments about this?
No, I was just trying to have a little fun.
Okay.
No, when we said slides, it's pretty self-evident. I mean, this is human evolution, which is kind of sad. But this is a pretty good graph. Well, it's terrible, but so this is healthcare spending per capita. So we're spending $10,000 per person in America per year, and most other OECD nations are less than half. I'll give you one thing to pay attention to for your local politicians. Have you followed the Ozempic discussion and okay, so that's a $15,000 per annum forever medicine that FDA is about to approve for the obese population, which might be a really good idea. Economically, I don't know how that's going to work, and I don't know if they're thinking about it. So this is a problem, and our food should be our medicine, and our medicine should be our food. That's your concern about the economics of this medicine? We can't afford it. It's like, I don't know what to do about it. I don't have, we just can't afford it. We can't afford our healthcare system as it is today, I would argue. And we certainly can't double the cost per capita because there's a lot of people that would want that medicine. And I'm also concerned, this is a whole other conversation about side effects, taking the medicine for 15, 20 years. We have no idea what that's going to bring. It can't be good.
Thank you very much, both of you. So now it's a chance for us to have some dialogue around some of these very exciting themes that you all shared. You each have a microphone at your seat. So we had a set of questions that I'm going to start to throw aside in part because I think this was such an exciting discussion. So thank you both. I'm super interested in the shift that you're both talking about. And I think comments about care, comments about flavor, these are comments about incentivizing human behavior and behavior change. What in your experiences have you each seen that have made significant shifts that we can replicate or learn from, that have started to shift behaviors and practices, norms, be they cultural or habitual, that go in the right direction? So much about design is saying, where are there bright spots that we can pursue or we can explore further? Are there moments that you've seen in your work, whether it's a restaurant, transformation of how restaurants are structured or practiced, or whether it's in local food sovereignty programs. Just an example from each of you around those important shifts.
I'll start at a very personal level because the work that we're engaged in is really about cultivating relationships with food. And there's an incredible behavioral psychologist named Dr. Charles Spence who works in the UK, and he wrote this book about gastroneurology. And he talks about how it is proven that if you are a culture that either eats with your hands or uses bowls, for example, that you pick up and actually weigh with your hands, that it's actually is a kind of trigger in your mind around the quantity of food that you're eating. And it's such a small thing, but it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. And I just think that there's this idea that when we open up our behaviors and embrace other ways of eating and other experiences when it comes to eating, it can really have a fundamental shift in our relationship with food. That can also mean growing something, even if you have never grown something before. I'm teaching my toddlers to be gentle with plants, and the most amazing summer thing is to like grow a tomato plant and touch the leaves and then smell your fingers. So now my 4-year-old's always like touching plants and like smelling his fingers. And I think that this kind of sensorial piece of it is kind of maybe a ripple, or like maybe it's the stone that you throw up that creates the ripple for individual behavioral change.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I have been part of some, I was part of very, very early Chipotle. It wasn't mentioned, but I was chairman of Chipotle for a number of years and was part of that early growth. And that was very inspiring to see. And we did a lot of really good work. And we managed to create a brand that had room for both deliciousness and excitement and indulgence and a better care for our planet, and we called it food with integrity, and that worked for a long time. And I think to some extent they're still at it. I don't know if they just produced a little film the other day that I saw that was beautiful called Human Nature. So they're doing their part. So it is possible to sort of course, change. And I've seen many such efforts. I think what is not helpful, that I hope I don't come across as such, is that we live in a very binary culture where, you have to find the villain here. And, I used to work for McDonald's, so I've been thrown a lot of eggs and tomatoes in my face. It's so convenient to just think it's just their fault. It's not. Every human almost I know struggle with this. It's hard. I struggle with it. So we have to have this fierceful dedication and commitment to this is a real problem we have to fix, an enormous empathy, an enormous willingness to help people to make better choices. And it's going to take a village.
Mats, I was like really inspired because I think this was kind of set up for us to be like Mats versus LinYee. But clearly we believe in the same fundamental things. Like we want to see systems-wide change that is rooted in having a healthy relationship with food. One of the questions I had, sorry, Maura, I'm taking over, is, when you talk about kind of helping people make healthy choices, I'm always very curious about this kind of more top-down approach to what is healthy eating. And I'll say that because as somebody who is like Chinese American but grew up in Texas and basically grew up in New York, people in New York, we're like healthy eating is like salad, right? Like everyone should eat a salad a day. But I'm Chinese and I didn't grow up eating salad, so and I actually don't feel like salad is really my body's not really into salad. So I always wonder, I'm really curious about this kind of push and pull of someone being like, this is the right way of eating, versus people being like, I just want to eat Cheetos all day. Where does the balance come?
Hi. How
I know, sorry.
How many,
Sorry, did I
how
open
much
the
time do
Pandora's
we-
box?
How much time do we have? It's a great question. And certainly the powers that be, whoever they might be, over the last 67 years has confused the shit out of the American population. They've not been helpful. Eggs are bad, eggs are good. This is good, this is bad. And to this day, it's not very helpful.
Agreed.
I was meeting a professor at Booth today. Her daughter has just finished residency. And I asked, and I always ask when people go through medical school, how many hours of training did she get in nutrition? 0.
That's right.
So can you imagine that this is the biggest contributor to unhealth, and no doctor gets trained at this whatsoever? It's unimaginable how stupid we can be. My answer to your question is, first of all, it depends on people. People are different. But I think in America in general, if I just averaged it out, America needs to cut back significantly on processed foods.
That's right.
Cut back significantly on poorly, highly refined carbohydrates. Cut back significantly on sugars. And if we're going to eat animal products, they should be grass-fed. And if we're going to eat produce, they should preferably be organic and not have glyphosate sprayed on them. So basically, I think Michael Pollan has the best definition of what we should eat. We should eat whole foods, real foods, not so much, preferably with people we love, you know.
Mostly
and
plants.
Mostly plants.
Yeah.
And we should also do it, we should also only use ingredients that our grandmothers would have recognized as food.
And I'm going to add that we can touch the leaves of, that we can see the growth of, and that are nurtured by our communities. You talk a lot about service and how critical that is. You talked about how important care is in in your Field Meridians work. I think that connection is a critical piece that we have lost in so much of this processed manufactured system that we have, which, as you said, is incentivized by low-cost corn and all of these economic factors which have driven this medical fiasco that you're talking about.
How do we change, can I ask back a question to you? For designers, how do we change the cultural zeitgeist? I'll give you 2 examples, okay? So I have 10 grandchildren. And I now spend some weekends on soccer fields. And my kids have done well. They've been good students. One went here. So they live in nice neighborhoods where most moms and dads have good jobs. They're very well educated. They know exactly what to eat. Why are we bringing donuts to kids' soccer games? Why are we bringing crap food for snacks? Why are we serving bad food in schools? We know that's not good.
It's convenience.
Yeah, but it doesn't. The carrots are also convenience.
Yeah, I would also argue that there's no such thing as bad food. Like, I mean, it's who dictates that it's bad. I fundamentally agree that we should not eat processed foods, but I also love Cheetos and cheese. Like, I dream about goldfish sometimes, and you know, I think about this because, you know, it's funny, I was in a cab over here, and I love talking to cab drivers, it's my New York side, and he's like, what are you doing, like, you know, what are you doing with all these magazines? I was like, oh yeah, I just make this magazine, and I'm doing a talk. He's like, what are you talking about? I was like, I'm talking about food. He's like, oh yeah, that's a big problem. I was like, yeah. I was like, what do you think about food? And he just, you know, really went off, and he was kind of like, fuck the man. I was like, yeah. But, you know, what I was saying to him is that, you know, like, monoculture is not only just this problem within an agricultural system, which is like we just grow corn and soybeans, but monoculture is also a problem within our cultural conversation, where there is no space for diversity, whether we're talking about biodiversity or we're talking about the diversity of, I'm sorry, we're in a modernist temple, but like a diversity in like design approaches, you know, this kind of, to your point, you know, dichotomy, the cultural dichotomy that we live in, which is bad and good, or like modernist or not okay, like all of these things I think are creating a deeper problem of divisions that you mentioned in your introduction. And how do we as designers, as creative people, and I think this is really the key for us in the work that we do, is that we as individuals are all creative. And how do we access that creativity in relationship with the food system So, you know, like people like me, I can eat goldfish all the time. My mother was actually a nutritionist, and this is probably where all my trauma comes from, and I'm passing it on to my children, where I'm like, no, you can't eat applesauce. Like, you have to eat an apple. But like, you know, I think that there should be space for all of the things, but we need to empower people to see themselves as like, oh, well, I have a relationship with food. It's not just this thing that I like put in my body to like satiate me. It's like something that should be done with care. It's literally like, what else do we put inside of our bodies every single day, all the time? It's crazy that we don't have a relationship with it. It's crazy that like we don't think about it. And so that, to your point, like this kind of behavioral shift, this cultural change, I think really starts with this idea of being in relationship with the full spectrum of possibility and ideas, and kind of starting there as a place of imagination.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to hand it over to you all, okay? So here we are in our design temple, and what role really of design do we have to make our desired future food systems more values-based? In what ways can design embody, invite, inspire more values-based decisions for the kind of food system future that we want?
Well, I love this word that you used, Maura, which is about embodiment, right? Because, I mean, literally we eat food and then it becomes our bodies. Like it's the crazy, when we think about it, it's crazy. And so I think that the work of design is to open the aperture around the conversation around food, and the work that y'all are doing today and hosting this conversation is a wonderful starting point. Or maybe like, you know, we're just, again, ripples in this kind of larger conversation. And so, yeah, I mean, relationship building, it's about agency, empowering people to see themselves reflected, and not just feel like they're just like, you know, consumption. Yeah.
It's such a good question. I think my hope and dream would be if we could make the hypocrisy, like the linkage between food and medicine clearer, such that I had this question at Booth today to a professor there, and I said, why is it that we have gone after cheap food in America? We love cheap food, and we seem not to care so much about really expensive medicine. Wouldn't it be much better life for everybody if we lowered the cost of medicine so we can pay a little bit more for better food? Wouldn't that be like a complete victory for farmers, for soil, for everything? And why is that so hard to see? So I would love the design community to help make that case strong.
Mm-hmm. To
That's
visualize those systems. That's Wesleyan and my work.
Another pollen, by the way. Pay more, eat less.
Great. So who would like to ask a question of our fair guests here? We have a microphone. It's this one. Welcome your comments or questions.
I think one thing that I'll just keep talking is that you know, that I just thought of when you were speaking, Mats, is just the importance of understanding how everything is interconnected. To your point, soil health on the land, like, you know, the locusts of our food production, the oceans and the land are also the greatest potential for carbon capture and reversing climate change. This food system, the seed activist and incredible philosopher Vandana Shiva talks about how it's important to understand that the food web is actually the web of life. And if we can understand that in a deep and truly embodied way, I think that is also very powerful.
I'm just loving this conversation so much, and I'm kind of curious, especially from Matt's perspective, but LinYee, I'm curious about yours too. Especially when you think about food innovation that's happening like in a grocery store, and you think about a company like Frito-Lay, who has 95% of the chip aisle, or you think about like a Hormel or something like that who has 80% of the refrigerated aisle. Do you see innovation coming from these kind of entrenched players that are obviously very slow to innovate and need to have very big businesses in order to kind of go in that direction? Or do you see new players kind of coming in and really being able to challenge the Frito-Lays and the Hormels of the world? Or do you see some sort of combination of both?
I see a combination of both. First of all, I don't subscribe to the theory that a lot of people have that might agree with the sentiment of this conversation, that all those big companies are bad companies and they want people to really suffer. That's not what's going on. They want to sell product. And you said beautifully in one of your statements on your slides was your mouth has power, it drives demand. So unfortunately, this is my key problem. My boss always said to me that when I pushed McDonald's to do salads, we launched salads, and I pushed and pushed for all these things. And he got tired of me after a while, and he said, Mats, if parents can't get their kids to eat broccoli, why is that my problem? And he has a point. He has a point, not entirely, but a little bit. These companies are trying, many of them are trying, and it's certainly trending up, or whatever you might say. It's getting a little bit better. More product innovation is happening that's a little bit better. I would say that the venture system, venture-backed companies have in the CPG space, most of what's coming out is much better for you. That's been very frothy. Now, what's going on in the world, and bank crisis and venture crisis, many of them will probably die. But I've innovated, for instance, a candy company because kids are not going to stop eating candy. And we were horrified when we looked at what's in most candy. It's terrible. It's not even sugar. It's not even chocolate. So we invented a category, or a chocolate candy for kids primarily, called Unreal. If some of you have had it.
It's delicious.
It's very good. And we're doing great. It took a long time, but it's possible. So there's hope out there.
I'm going to play the bad guy here. I guess I have a question around, or prompt around, the fallacy of choice. So we're talking about, sort of the idea of food sovereignty and the notion or the ethos that everyone should have access to food that's culturally recognizable, delicious, healthy, all that good stuff. But I think it ignores the sort of glaring, or at least for me, the glaring issue of accessibility from an economic standpoint. And so even during the pandemic, where food prices and inflation roared on, and the chasm between commercially produced non-organic foods and GMO foods and organic foods sort of shrunk, there's still a price premium. And so I guess I'm wondering, how do we solve for those basic issues where it's not a matter of values, it's a matter of affordability? And then I guess my second comment or question is around the health cost. And for me, it appears that for a segment of our population, in order to shift from human-centered, healthy options for the individual, that they, again, have to have those resources. So if you're looking at someone that may be closer to the federal poverty level, their health care is being subsidized, right? So that's coming from the whole. And when you go to those individual healthy decisions, it's going to your individual household. And so I always think about these as we build systems and structures for people to make ostensibly better decisions for themselves as an individual than for us as a society. How do we actually empower them to make those changes?
I mean, it's undeniable that that's a problem. Particularly the first half of your question is a problem that needs to be addressed. Some of it, that's where, for instance, I mentioned in my remarks, subsidies. We are subsidizing bad foods. We should subsidize good foods. So that would be a start. I'm building a company with the help of some Swedish partners called Piccadilly, where we're bringing a very tech-enabled type of salad bar. So grocery stores in the part of America that never has any good food, which is what, half of America or something like that, where the grocery store is often the only choice for food. It might be a McDonald's, there might be something, but not likely a Sweet Green or something. And we're seeing some traction with that, where we can sell very low-cost salads for like $5, $6 for a lunch. That might not be enough, but that's one. So it's possible, but it needs to be addressed. And then, then you get into schools, you get into the SNAP program. Okay, here's an idea. SNAP program that's the food stamp program, which is a good program. I think generally speaking, it works reasonably well. $64 billion last year. 26% of that went to sugary sodas. Could we maybe not use stamps for sugary sodas, and so we can give people better food instead? Could we just stop that? I don't know how do you code that I don't know how you do that. But in theory, you would like to think that if you want to help people eat better, spending a quarter of that money on sugary sodas is not a great idea.
I also think within the neighborhood I live in, Crown Heights in Brooklyn, is the median income is close to the poverty line. And one of the, I don't have an answer for you. I don't know if there is an answer. But one of the things that we learned last summer when we did our first project is that across the economic spectrum, people insisted that our community deserved better access to healthier, fresher food. We are lucky to have a farmer's market in our community that also takes SNAP benefits. I think across New York City, most farmers markets do take SNAP benefits. But the ideas that the people within my community had were incredibly creative, incredibly excited. One woman was like, we should have all those green roofs that we keep reading about. We talked about having, an edible forest, access to an edible forest in our neighborhood. We talked about growing food on all of our stoops. It was incredible to hear the kind of, so the way we kind of unlocked these conversations is we basically put out a giant solar cooker in the middle of our park. It looks like a giant satellite. And because my neighborhood is partially Caribbean, some of my neighbors have actually cooked on a solar oven. There's also lots of campers in our neighborhood. So there was just an interesting kind of mix of people who are like, what is that? Oh, I know about that, or I've never seen that before. And that kind of sense of curiosity opened the door to a larger conversation about well, what do you think the future of food should look like in our neighborhood? How would you like to do that? Should we have a commercial kitchen, a communal kitchen? I know that when I'm at the end of the day packing lunches for my kids, it's such a lonely pursuit. And could that be a moment of joy instead, where together we can do it? A good friend of mine, Pilot, has during the pandemic it's really started getting into the community fridge network, and she is using design as a vehicle for engaging people within the community to really do the labor of food distribution within New York, bringing food from restaurants, from grocers, from fancy Sakara, I don't know if you're familiar with it, is that one of your companies? So Sakara donates food to these community fridges all across New York. And for her, design is a way of signaling dignity in the process of both servicing but also receiving food. And I think that that's such a beautiful vision to have, and a real actual way that design is making a significant difference within the communities that we live in New York.
And can I just point to cooking, since you mentioned it?
Yes.
I think that is one of the answers, because we've lost the art of cooking across big part of America. And cooking your own food is monstrously cheaper. And I've talked to a lot of people with poor economic circumstance. They still spend their precious few dollars, even though it's cheap food in their mind. It's not cheap food. You can go, buy a whole chicken for that and cook a soup. And there's a lot you can do.
I also think there's really interesting models and cooperative models that we should be looking at, right? Within Our neighborhood, I live in Crown Heights, which is in central Brooklyn. North of us is Bed-Stuy. One of the first Black female-led food cooperatives is set up in kind of central Brooklyn. It's the Central Brooklyn Food Cooperative, and that is also a way for us to have a relationship with our food, a relationship with our food providers, keep costs down. I mean, I think supermarkets typically double or triple the selling price based on what they have, the retail price, the price that they buy at. And so when looking at cooperative models for business, cooperative models of distribution, I think that there's other ways that we can be in relationship with one another and also in relationship with the food itself.
One last question.
Oh, sorry. So as it comes to affordability, I'm from, I used to study in Australia, and I think the most affordable thing that I could buy when I couldn't cook, because eating outside was expensive, was buying instant noodle and tuna. But I want to ask, is anything more affordable than a hot dog and a Coca in Costco for $1.50? I think, no, because of the affordability is really cheap in America to buy instant food, junk foods, and these things. So you think, okay, you know, the milk is much more expensive than Coca here, which is vice versa in Australia. And I think beside this, I think America makes or produces a lot and also consumes a lot. And I think it's a thing that we want to design habits, because you do have Google, Apple, Silicon Valley, and I didn't see any countries to send that much in paper letters. So you do have the technology, you do have everything, but you use to the old habits of the sending papers and wasting. And just say, okay, or I don't know, it's about using plastics, and I didn't see that much people here just carrying their own shopping bags and not using plastic things. I think it's about time for America to just design the habits. I think we did great in production. Thank you.
Yes.
I mean, I agree. Like, I mean, we live in an extractive culture, and yeah.
Oh, one last question? Yes, please.
Hello. Thank you, LinYee and Matt, for some informative session. My question to Matt is regarding the story about your grandchildren that you talked, who brings donuts to the playground, and what man said it's all about convenience. So my question is, how much do you think is consumerism and competition has made humankind go towards the convenience-centric world?
Some, but I actually think a lot of those habits are shaped by us, and it's a cultural thing. I have one of my daughter's best friends had a birthday party for her, a bunch of kids, a couple of weekends ago, and she had a big, what do you call it, piñata, and they was hitting this piñata, and they were waiting for candy or whatever to come out. It was all carrots. She's very health-minded. And they were so disappointed. But then a really great conversation came about, and she's very smart, she's a coach, so she turned that around. And I just think we all have to pitch in here. And every time I see a pack of bad food at a soccer, I mean, we don't bring it, we've never. My wife is a dentist. You know what she brought when she had soccer duty?
Grapes.
No, toothbrush and toothpaste. Like, first of all, the whole notion that we need to eat all the time is also bad.
Right.
Kids don't need to snack that much. It's like, I mean, sometimes I'm not orthodox. I love ice cream. Of course they should have a snack. Of course we should celebrate. Of course you should have your favorite, whatever it is. and it's not monolithic, but we have to help each other get out of the craziness.
Yeah.
And I think that's the question you asked about value, like how can design shift us into a values-centered model and approach? And, you know, the culture is of convenience. It's a capitalist culture that tells us that we should be spending our times working, and then eating isn't that important. It's just like fuel to work. And so it should be convenient, and we should be able to eat it at our desk. Like, it's so sad. And so, you know, I think this, like, culture, for me, my family is so food-centric because I'm first generation, and so all of our celebrations were hinged around food and eating together and cooking together. So culturally, I just grew up in a culture that was like, no, it's really important to cook together. It's really important to sit down every night and eat together. And unfortunately, we just like the dominant culture in the United States isn't part of that same narrative.
It's not valuing it. Mats and LinYee, thank you so much for a most inspiring conversation this evening. I'm sure you all, like me, have a stomach growling with all this discussion about food. We do have a lovely buffet of reception here in this room. It's a ROTI Mediterranean restaurant has come here. So thank you, Mats, for that. So please, everyone, join me with a round of applause for our guests as for a fun conversation tonight.
Thank you.